Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and well, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to this webinar on energy deregulation and blockchain, a perfect match. This is a very interesting topic as we speak because energy regulation is happening all around the world. We see that many markets in Europe, in America, in Asia are starting to liberalize their electricity market, and blockchain is popping up as a solution to enable this transition. So it is my honor to present Martin Lim, COO of Electrify.Asia, who's going to speak a little bit more about this very interesting topic. So let's get started. This is how the agenda looks like for today. I'm going to start with a brief introduction. And then Martin is going to cover the topics on what is blockchain's roles in a deregulated energy market, talking about cost, and all the opportunities that it brings to the stakeholders. We're going to finish with the Q&A with Martin, so make sure to stick around until the end and make sure to give us your questions so we can ask Martin. And then we'll be finishing the webinar. We're doing this webinar in the run-up to our event Blockchain2Energy Asia, which will be happening the 27th of November in Singapore. And what we're doing is we're going to connect and empower Asia's emerging blockchain energy industry. We see that in Asia, a lot of utilities are starting to experiment with pilot projects and making partnerships with startups. So we're going to make these programs specifically tailored to Asian blockchain energy applications, and we're going to bring the leading projects in the region. So make sure if you're interested in blockchain and energy, this is an event that you can't miss. And I am happy to announce that actually Blockchain2Energy Asia is now part of the Asia Blockchain Week, which will happen in Singapore as well from the 27th of November to the 1st of December, with the idea of making blockchain mature after its third edition. So we're partnering up with Blockshow, which is the leading blockchain solutions event in the region, and it's powered by Cointelegraph, the independent blockchain media platform. Yeah, don't miss your chance to come to Asia Blockchain Week, both for Blockshow and Blockchain2Energy and many other surprises during the Asia Blockchain Week. So just a little word for all of those of you who don't know us. We're Solarplaza. We were established in 2004. And as you can see in our world map, we have organized more than 100 different events in more than 30 different countries. And we have a growing network of more than 60,000 solar PV professionals around the world. So some practical notes. So if you have any issues at all, you can use the chat box directly, and Marco will help you with any technical issues. And if you have any questions, please make sure to use the questions box on here on your menu, and we will be going through them at the Q&A. And just the slides will be available afterwards. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to present Martin Lim, COO and co-founder at Electrify.Asia. He's a very experienced entrepreneur and business developer. I see that Martin has been in a lot of different industries, such as the internet industry, water treatment, energy, communications, and more. He co-founded Arteron to provide micro water treatment devices for disaster relief in the region. And with his partner, Julius Tan, he founded Electrify in Singapore as the first marketplace for retail electricity plants in the region. Electrify raised more than $30 million with the ICO, and it is one of the main blockchain projects companies in Asia. Martin, I give you the virtual floor, and yeah, very excited to hear what you have to say.
Great, thank you very much, Leoncio. This is really very, very exciting. So, okay, great. I'll click show my screen, and that's it, we're live. Okay,
yes.
So I prepared a little presentation. What we're calling this, essentially, it's, I'll give it a little bit of title. It's called David and Goliath, right? This talks a little bit about the space of blockchain, what it's doing within this deregulated energy space itself. So without much further ado, this is David and Goliath, right? So the whole idea of David and Goliath really is this. We're all very familiar with the story, I think, right? We all know about the giant and we all know about the little guy, right? The little guy is called David. And David's always just armed with just a sling, and that's all he's got. Whereas the giant, heck, he's well armed. He's got his muscles, he's got his weapons and everything else. And this is always given as a metaphor about the underdog, right? The small star, the small company, or the little guy versus the big guy, how he triumphs over this. And the thing is, with this, we want to challenge this because we feel that this isn't entirely true, right? And here's why. We look at the giant, for instance, right? We know now that this giant actually suffered from a condition called acromegaly. And we know over time now that this was actually an issue. It was a tumor pressing against the pituitary gland, causing an increased production of growth hormones. And one of the side effects of this is that this giant had impaired vision. So essentially, we know the giant can't see. And that's incredibly important in this environment. When we talk about the energy space itself, the giant can't see. And the next question we need to ask about this environment really is, did a toy really kill the giant? Because when we look at this slingshot, for example, right, this slingshot itself had incredibly high speeds in rotation. It could spin up to 35 meters, create projectile velocity of 35 meters a second. And that stone that could impact the giant, right, had a ballistic equivalent of a 45 caliber bullet. And of course, given the context of our conversation today, we know that this device was decentralized. You didn't need permission from somebody to create this weapon of yours. This weapon was wholly democratized. Anybody could do it. You didn't need training or whatever else. You could. Every shepherd, every person could just make their own sling. And lastly, it was also disintermediated. You didn't need a central body to train you. You didn't need a central permission. You didn't need the king to say, hey, you're allowed to make a sling. And this is very, very important because this forms the foundation of what the blockchain is really, right? We have disintermediation, decentralization, and so on. And that brings us to the conversation of who exactly is Electrify, because we form the next D in this whole conversation. We handle digitization. Energy markets across Asia are liberalizing, as you said so, Leoncio, right? And the Singapore market itself started deregulating back in 2001. So we've been in the state of deregulation for quite a long while, where big commercial customers were the first ones to be able to switch out to private retailers. And what Electrify did a year and a half ago was we set up Southeast Asia's first electricity marketplace. And that's actually very, very significant. Because as the first electricity marketplace, what we did was we took electricity contracting and we made it a digital process. And this is what we did. Prior to us coming to the market, all the contracts were made very, very slow. They were done pen and paper. What we did instead was to actually take this contracting and we digitized it. We created digital formats for everything, allowing for contracts to be signed in less than 10 minutes. In the old days, it would take almost a week for customers to see contracts, to get prices and so on, and decide to buy, make payments with checks. Incredibly slow and very, very inefficient. And this is what we did in the first place. So what we did next was to actually look at developing a platform to allow for these same digitized contracts to be logged into the blockchain itself, right? And we know that doing this through smart contracts brings us a great deal of reduction in costs. And this is possible only in a deregulated marketplace like Singapore, for example, right? Reduce costs of reconciliation in terms of payment settlement, reduce transaction fees and administration as well. And of course, and most importantly, because of the blockchain, we are able to reduce credit risk. Now, all these savings get translated to the end user. And that was the first platform we built, the marketplace. And what we dub now on the migration to blockchain is Marketplace 2.0. The next thing we built was something called Synergy, a peer-to-peer trading platform that occurs over the main grid. And this is actually very, very significant because as you look in the environment, what we see really is that there's a large proliferation of distributed energy resources because of globalization, easy access to information, access to the hardware and so on. Most people would be able to say, look, if I have the interest and I've got the means and I've got the space, I can actually build my own power generation unit. And that's actually very, very significant because that starts to decentralize the generation of power through a DER, or distributed energy resource. And the next thing we saw also was this. Grid structures were changing. And this is something that's very, very interesting for us. So we looked at a number of other energy companies in recent years that were talking about peer-to-peer energy trades. And a lot of them were describing modes in which you could do it on a microgrid. We see it from a much bigger, more scalable picture because in some of the projects we've seen around Southeast Asia that we were asked to consult on, microgrids were starting to get integrated into a larger structure itself. In places like Myanmar, for example, where 70% of the population live off-grid, this becomes a very significant business model because the key really isn't, the problem isn't about how to connect the various microgrids. We've known how to connect the physical engineering part of things, right, for decades. What was always a problem was settlement. And the next development in integrated microgrids really was this. We're seeing also in more mature markets like Europe, for example, microgrids and integrated microgrids are now beginning to be connected back to main utility or main grids, whole citywide grids. And that's actually very, very significant because being able to do so, right, means that there's an opportunity for trading of energy between these two grid structures. And of course, we know from projects from a few years ago, like LO3s, for example, the Brooklyn Microgrid project, within main grids themselves, you also have microgrids popping up also. So out of this whole melange, this mix of different grid structures full of integration and a whole lot of decentralization, what we're describing this new structure as, and we've coined this term, the omni-grid. So what we've done really is this, to build a trading platform that allows for energy trading to occur across a whole grid, regardless of structure. And the model that we built really was this. It's based on that of a CFD. Now, energy trading on this scale has been done by energy utilities, right, for decades, for a very, very long time. And they always had the means to do so. This occurred even in regulated markets. But they did it through a mechanism of CFD. Now they've got the accountants and the consultants and so on to do it, and it was a very costly exercise. What we did with our Synergy platform was to develop a means in which you could take these energy contracts, these CFDs, bring them down to a level of smart contracts and make them wholly accessible to everyone else. The prosumers and consumers that want to participate will be able to use these contracts and allow the transactions to be logged onto the blockchain, and thereby making this a very democratized process, make it easily accessible for them. And that's what we're looking to build. What we imagine the interface would look like would be something like this, right, where the end user would be able to see their entire consumption and the energy mix within the power they're consuming. They'd also be able to see the kind of energy they're buying, who they're buying it from, a bit of profile. And lastly, of course, you're able to see the conventional energy mix within that as well, because renewable energy as it is, you don't get production 24 hours a day. Solar, for example, you get it on the times when the sun's shining, for instance. If it's raining or in the evenings or at night, that power consumption has to be fulfilled by conventional energy source. So all that can be presented in an easy to understand interface, like what we're designing here and what we're visualizing here. And very importantly, the next thing really is, as we were building this platform, we realized the big problem was in energy matching. Because in the perfect environment, what happens really is that a producer producing a certain amount of energy, 100% of all this energy will be consumed in a perfect match with the consumer on the other end, using exactly that amount of power. And of course, in the real world, that never exists. So we spend quite a lot of time planning and working and designing the matching algorithm itself to allow for a proper trading platform where all the energy produced as contracted will be consumed within a portfolio of consumers and vice versa. So this creates optimum pairing for supply and demand. And all this, of course, requires a lot of data. In a regulated market, access to this data would be very, very difficult. In a deregulated market, we have a lot more opportunities too. First thing we did was to develop this. the PowerPod IoT gateway. This device will be hooked up to a smart meter and allows to pull data directly from smart meters to create visualization like this. This is a visualization that we're already pulling, showing the production against the consumption from a consumer, and all these volumes, this amount of energy produced and consumed, is mapped against wholesale energy prices on a deregulated market like this. In a deregulated market like ours in Singapore, for example, we're talking to the incumbents to find if there's opportunity for us to pull live data directly from their databases itself. That's proving to be a challenge because, well, grid operators still have a hold on the data. In the Singapore context, commercial data takes 6 business days to get released. In the Japanese context, it takes over a month. So it's things like this which we are trying to work out with some of our partners overseas. So as you can see, the giant, as we said before, right, can't see. But what we're doing is we're offering these incumbents, like TEPCO, for example, some access to our software to figure out how we can execute these trades together with them. So the first thing we're doing right now in Singapore is that our Synergy platform, we're going to alpha test in Singapore. We're executing simulated trades already with 15 producers and consumers. There are, if I recall correctly, there are now on our platform 3 prosumers, and there are already 12 consumers trading this power already. And this occurs over a main grid, and that's very, very significant. There is no physical infrastructure built to move the power physically between themselves. We're relying wholly on the grid level transmission and distribution. So in terms of the kind of projects we're looking to move forward in, we've got 2 potential projects we're scoping now for Japan. There's a pilot project we're looking at in Kyushu in the south of Japan with a company called Take Energy. Take Energy owns 6 solar farms. They also own an energy retailer called Kumamoto. And right now we're scoping the ability for them to be able to trade power directly from their solar farms through to their retail customers, bypassing the retail entity. So it'll be a peer-to-peer trade directly from the farms itself. The project we're hoping to scope in early next year, early 2019 with TEPCO, is the ability to duplicate what we're doing in Singapore with Synergy in Tokyo itself. If everything goes right at the fastest, we can hope for some kind of commercialization model to be executed by the year 2020, which is a very, very significant thing for us because Japan's a huge market compared to what Singapore can do. Next thing, in Southeast Asia, we're talking to 2 separate grid operators in 2 different countries about potentially deploying our marketplace platforms there. We've got an embargo right now on who these clients are, but if any of the guys here have looked at the energy news in the region, for example, announcements have been made in the last couple of months about a new market that's opening up, looking at deregulating next 2 to 3 years. So we're talking to that grid operator already now to see if we can actually find a way to deliver our solution and see how we can be relevant to collaborate with them. And this is what we hope to do with different grid operators in the region. And of course, lastly, I'm going to sum it up very quickly about what Synergy attempts to do and why it's very significant for a deregulated market like this. The design, first things first, in blockchain, we always talk about engagements with the end user. The end user cannot access or use the new technology. That's always going to be a problem. So we look at a low friction design that makes it accessible to the various stakeholders for this new tech itself. What we hope to do is also to offer real-time data. With the access to real-time data, it opens up a lot of new opportunities and business models for the regulated market. So in this case, for example, something we talked about to different participants and different operators was the ability to handle things like, for instance, deal with the issue of sovereignty of data. Could someone who's got his data, his consumption, his load profile, hashed onto a blockchain, for example, would he be able to access it and use it as proof of his payment record, for instance, and in doing so, demonstrate that he's less of a credit risk to a new retailer? And by being able to do that, he could get a better, cheaper, fairer electricity price. Subsequent to that, also real-time data allows us also to execute other models, like for instance, micropayments on power consumption itself. further reducing credit risk and potentially allowing for end users to get cheaper access to power because there's just less risk to deal with. What we're designing with Synergy is a capacity-based platform, which what that means really is that this platform is designed to accommodate for variability, and that's actually very, very important because unlike a conventional energy source, where say a power generator running on gas or diesel or coal, where the power output is consistent and can be controlled, and there's a degree of curtailment, dispatchability as it were. With solar and renewables, very often we don't have that kind of projection. What we do hope to do is, of course, to be able to pull real-time data to allow for this platform to actually transact and trade that volume of energy produced in real time. And lastly, of course, as I said earlier on, I kept going on about this, the reduction of risk. Because I think something that a lot of end users aren't very aware of, at the retail level, energy is very much about risk management. They're all treated very much as financial instruments. And that's exactly the space that we're in. And we see blockchain as being a very big contributor into that space itself. And that essentially is what we do. In Southeast Asia, other projects we're looking at, we've rolled up an arrangement with Narada. Narada is one of the largest industrial battery deployment partners in the world. These guys are second to only guys like Samsung and LG Chem. And what they do is they provide energy solutions for facilities like data centers, for example. And the opportunity represented by us really is that because we look at how energy can be traded and can transacted against wholesale market prices, we can take real-time action with the energy that they store. So this opens a great deal of arbitrage opportunity as well, and that's something we're exploring together with Narada. So in terms of what technology, what blockchain technology can do for a deregulated grid, I think we're only right now scratching the surface and only right now at the tip of the iceberg. I think over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot more varied and a lot more interesting business models come out of it. And that, in a nutshell, is pretty much what Electrify does. So back to you, Leoncio. Happy to take any questions you've got about what we do and take a Q&A from you and from everyone else attending.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for the great presentation. Indeed, I do myself have some personal questions, and I invite everybody here listening to put your questions on the question box so that we can ask Martin directly. Okay, well, thanks, Martin. It was a great presentation. Fascinating to see the story of David and Goliath. You know, it really adds a new perspective to this whole discussion. And well, I'm wondering from my side. Well, we can say that Electrify, you know, is sort of going against Goliath, right? Against the big regulated utilities, big companies. Like in your experience and what you've been having with Electrify, is there any pushback from the incumbents when you try to work with them? I mean, I see you're already working with several incumbents in different countries, but overall, I mean, how do they see these sort of these you know, these new David in deregulated markets?
It's really interesting because so the reception has been a little mixed, but on the whole, it's been very, very positive. Because I think the grid operators, the power companies, they are aware that blockchain is here to stay. It's a new layer of technology, a new way of doing things. What they are trying to figure out right now is how to deploy it. And it is something that we tell them, we meet them as well. We say this all the time. Blockchain's not this magic condiment that you sprinkle on stuff and it makes everything better. We always go after a proper case, right? It's got to add value. It's got to be significant enough to their operations, to the people, to the users, for it to be deployed. But on the whole, though, the operators have been very, very positive. I mean, we're seeing a lot of action around the region. Japan, for example, right? They've TEPCO themselves have launched a retailer called Trendy that's looking into blockchain development and looking at trying to deploy peer-to-peer energy trading in the Japanese market already. So us going in there, hopefully we're looking at a technology exchange and being able to contribute in some way to some of these projects. out of Southeast Asia, the couple of grid operators we spoke with as well, they've explored blockchain projects on their own to try and determine if the business model makes sense.
Yeah.
Singapore, for example, SP made a big announcement, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, about deploying blockchain in a REC marketplace, renewable energy certificates. That's a very popular thing. So a number of the operators, I think on the whole, they are very open to the idea of deploying the technology. And because in our position, what we do is when we engage them, right, we're not antagonistic. We don't come to the table saying that, oh, we're here to disrupt you, we're here to put a stone in your head. We don't do that, right? Which is why I challenge the whole idea of David and Goliath. In our case, we see it really as David wanting to work with Goliath. And we very much want to do so. As you can see from the earlier stuff, the way I described synergy, we're looking at collaborating together with the grid operators. And that's our position. We think that there's room enough in the whole ecosystem for a great deal of collaboration, for a great deal of research together, and to determine new business models. Because every country deploys a deregulated market in a slightly different way. And the rules are different, the regulations are different, so we have to work together to solve this.
Yeah, I agree definitely, and I mean personally, I think it's not a zero-sum game, right? Where if one wins, the other one loses. With blockchain, with the introduction of blockchain, we can create a system that that's beneficial for everybody, including the consumer, the producers, DSOs, TSOs, etc. Right?
Yep.
Perfect. We have a couple of questions coming in, so for example, let me ask you one that Yas is asking. For the prosumer, the trading license will be under the prosumer or Electrify company? Somebody who's using your platform, is it sort of the trading license, the Energy Market Authority in this case of Singapore? Is that going to be under the prosumer or under Electrify?
So in the Singapore context, right, it will be, there is no need for a trading license per se, because what happens really is that the prosumer generating power, okay, so how it really works is this: with a CFD, a contract for difference, right, the prosumer is able to send his power into the grid. For that, he needs the license to begin with. But in the Singapore context, that's been simplified. There are two mechanisms in Singapore. One, to generate power into the grid, to put power into the grid. You can either apply to the EMA to get a regulatory license that says you're a generator, which is complicated, and if you're a small producer, it's not worth your time to do so. So there is what's simplified credit treatment in Singapore, and what that does is you can go to the incumbent SP, for example, and contract with SP to allow SP to buy power from them and settle on their behalf. Right? That's called a central intermediary scheme. Now, what we do is the trading platforms on the CFD contract for difference. Because when you settle with the grid, you're settling almost always at the wholesale price, essentially, which is not a good ROI if you've got an asset on your rooftop generating power. What we allow is a commercial contract on the side, which allows the prosumer and the consumer to have a second layer of settlement. So that is the delta, and the delta is calculated against the spot prices. So that's a commercial deal, and that does not require licensing, and that's in the Singapore context. In other markets, it really depends on what the rules are in the market, and we'll have to pivot accordingly for those markets itself. So there's no one answer that fits every market in the world.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with you. And thanks for the answer. And just wondering, imagine you were to try to bring this to a regulated market, right? One that is still fully regulated, state monopoly. How would you go and address this state monopoly, like on the benefits of adding blockchain and deregulation?
Yeah, so that's going to be a problem.
Yep.
It does make sense, but in a regulated market, I'll be honest with you, our hands are very much tied. Doesn't mean that market we have no opportunity. So I just got back from a trip in Indonesia. So Indonesia itself is a regulated market. There are no signs of them deregulating anytime soon. However, there are large, how do I put this? There are large developers who run entire townships, and they've expressed interest. We spoke to a couple of people over this last weekend, very informally, and the interest is there. Because you think about it, a township essentially becomes a microgrid within a main grid structure itself. So in Indonesia, for example, in a city like, say, Jakarta, a number of the very large conglomerates build, manage, develop large townships, whole entire mixed-use townships with hospitals, malls, condominiums, landed houses, and so on. They are keen to look at the potential for renewable energy generation and to be able to put in a model like ours, a settlement layer. So even though we plan ours to occur across a main grid itself, it doesn't mean we can't scale down to work on a microgrid or a large microgrid in the case of these operators.
Okay. Oh wow. Yeah. So well, this is the potential is huge, right?
Yep.
Because okay. Yeah. Definitely. Okay. Well, there's more questions from the audience. I'm gonna go through one of them. An audience asks, in your view, do you see permission or permissionless blockchain platforms as dominating? And let's take this in the case of the energy industry. I think this would be more interesting because, of course, it differs by industry. But let's look at the energy industry. Do you think it's gonna go more on the permission blockchain platform or permissionless?
I think more importantly, really, is a matter of question of transaction speed. Right now, permission are where it is right now in terms of it is all to do with the protocol, isn't it? How fast the transactions get hashed and how much can be transacted through. So that's one consideration. The next consideration really is if we're working with the large incumbents, the large power players, we expect to some degree the negotiations will have to go down the route of a permission blockchain. So we think that is that one. We're also exploring the ability to create a hybrid model whereby end users across different jurisdictions will be able to enter transactions into, say, for example, Ethereum, for instance. However, the logging of the load profiles and the microtransactions that occur will happen and can be validated onto a sidechain itself. And then, of course, we'll look at the bridging technologies that have to bridge the two of them. But I don't think there's any one clear-cut solution that will occur across all of them. I honestly wish there was. It will make our job a lot easier in terms of deployment and everything else. But the energy space is incredibly varied, and they're just every country you go to, there's just too many considerations, and a lot of it is political, to be honest.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, another question over here. Which unregulated markets beyond the ones you find in Asia Pacific excites you? I mean, are you, because of course we see that Electrify, well, is very active in Southeast Asia and well in the whole Asia region. But are you looking to expand to other markets?
Yeah, I mean, we of course we dream about going elsewhere. We particularly like the idea of Australia because that's quite low hanging fruit. Of course, like the idea of Europe as well. We're talking to very early conversations off and on with one of the energy companies out of Europe. This conversation is going off and on for a couple of months. We're hoping to get some kind of traction, but again, it really depends because Europe itself is a very, very mature market. But we reckon that with like a pan-European grid, for example, a platform like ours could be quite significant. So at the end of the day, really, a lot of these guys who come down and they ask us the questions about the feasibility for deploying in their markets, they want to see test cases. They want to see that we've deployed it somewhere else. So that's what we're looking to do right now with our alpha. So I think once we've completed alpha and we're looking at once we start scoping the ability to do it in Japan, we'll get a lot more traction very significantly in the other more mature markets like Europe and Australia.
Yeah, and these are definitely big markets. And well, can you tell us a little bit more about Alpha? Actually, an audience member is asking if you can share a little bit more about Alpha. So, for example, like the profile of the 15 people involved, or the 15 companies involved, and you know what's the timeline? You know what would be the main objective for you?
Sure. So the Alpha really, at this point now, so the initial scope for Alpha was we had invited participants. So they're all known parties to us, the friends and family, and some are business acquaintances. They're all prosumer and consumer, all individuals, not
Okay.
companies. We had one potential for a company very early on, but even though one of the directors said he was keen to participate, the decision had to go to the board of directors, and that dragged, and that process was too difficult, because what we really wanted was a test, a proof of concept that this could actually be done. We could actually read the data from both ends and execute a trade between the two of them. And that's basically what we are doing right now. The purpose of this alpha test is really for data gathering and to test the installation, the hardware deployment. Of course, you run into some operational issues, like certain things, like even down to the level of the contractors showing up on time and all that. These are things to be ironed out in any business. So these are some of the things we did. The purpose of this really is to demonstrate at least that it can be done, so that when we launch our beta early next year, we'll be able to carry out the actual transaction, the movement of value itself between the participants. The alpha test is meant to run for this quarter, Q4. So by the end of this quarter, after Christmas, we should be able to review all the data, look at our analysis, and start generating our reports to see what went right, what went wrong. We're giving ourselves the ability and opportunity to say if we want to extend the alpha by maybe another month or two into 2019. But the way things are going right now, things have been pretty smooth. We don't reckon we need the extra time. So yeah, it's pretty much to test the software, make sure it works before we go live and start moving value.
Yeah, well, exciting times, and I'm really curious to see where it's going, and hoping for the best. Really excited, to go, full production. But one of my questions is, during this alpha, how will the trading physically work? I think this is a very common question we find in peer-to-peer energy trading. How do the electrons move basically, and what is the role of the DSO? Even if it's within grid-connected microgrid, we're still using the poles and wires of the DSO, right?
That's right.
So I think as a brief refresher for everybody, how does it physically work?
Okay. So let's look at a simple comparison first, right? From let's talk about microgrid first. In a microgrid, and this gets asked a lot. So in a microgrid, think of it as a LAN party, right? Say you and a few friends gather at say your house. They all come over with laptops. They come to your house and say, "Hey, Leoncio, let's put the Ethernet hub on the table. We'll all put our cables or our Cat6 cables. We'll plug it in, and we'll all have a LAN party. We'll all game together. We'll all play, I don't know, whatever, Dota or something, right? On your dining table." That is a simple model of a microgrid.
Okay.
But you start scaling that up. You want to invite people in the whole block to play. You want to invite people in down the street to play. You want to invite your brother who lives across the city to play. Your hub is not going to work. Your hardware is not going to work. You end up relying on a service provider. You end up relying on the internet service provider, a wider network, so to speak. So that is where the DSO comes in. Exactly the same situation here. So this is again for the layman in our audience, right? The movement of energy is, right, when we transact or when we move the electricity between prosumer to consumer, right, we don't need to move the specific electrons from that solar panel into the grid, across the grid to say your house. We don't need to do that, because again, the reality is such in grid operations, reality is such, right? Let's say you are generating solar power on your rooftop. The reality is this: if we looked at the physics of things, the energy that you generate will flow not into the grid, but quite literally into your neighbor's house, because that's the nearest node that's consuming the power. Right? So the issue, as we look at it, as you look at grid operations, the issue is not the movement of electrons. That is never the problem. The problem is the tracking and settlement of those electrons that were produced and the electrons that were consumed.
Okay.
So the model that I give when I explain this to a lot of people who aren't in energy really is this. I say, look, think of the grid as a giant lake, right? And let's say you live on the north shore of the lake and you're producing energy, and the energy is water that gets entered into this lake, right? and I live on the south shore of the lake, and I will drink 1 cup of this water. I want to know that this water came from you. So the mechanism to do this, right? Once the water's in the lake, there's no way to track the atoms of the water to make sure it came from you. But since you contribute to that lake and I consume from the lake, I need to be able to track how much you have produced and how much I've consumed. That is the purpose of this settlement layer. And that's why blockchain is fantastic. Blockchain as a platform, as technology, is incredibly effective when it comes to tracking and logging in as a ledger, right? The transfer of value of all these conceptual constructs. And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I see. And then I can see the relevance of the power pod that you've developed, right? To keep track of all these changes. Okay, well that was a great example, very well explained. Let's go to another question here from the audience. Well, following on the alpha pilot, what would be the load side of the participants? Like what sizes are we talking?
They're all small. They're all small. We're all
residential.
All residential right now. They're all residential.
Okay.
The largest one that we've got right now is potentially one household that has about 30 kilowatts. So they're all very, very small.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right. Then let me see. We have more questions coming in, and a reminder for everybody to send in the questions. Gianluca asks, you raised funding through an ICO. What is the purpose or the function of the token in the project, and could the project work without a token model?
So this is something we asked a lot as well. Could this platform function without the blockchain or a blockchain? It could. And virtually anything you want to build could occur either on a centralized database or on a blockchain itself. So on a practical level, could it be centralized? Yeah, it could. Would people accept it and buy into it if it was centralized? I don't think so. I think that would be a big hurdle in the proliferation and the promotion of this technology or a platform. So that's one big consideration. So we raised our ICO. What the token is used for is to settle a transaction fee. So initially, when we first planned and we were designing the models, we had considered the ability for settlement of energy consumption in our token itself. But the more we looked into the math of it, it doesn't work, because between markets, between locations, the price of energy is different. And that is a very, very significant thing. We've seen other projects who've described their one token to be equivalent to a very finite 1 kilowatt hour of energy, for example. We did the math and we don't think that works. So what we've done instead was we designed a platform where it has two different settlement layers. One, the settlement for energy consumed itself will be in fiat. Because for very practical, very, very practical reasons, the big power companies, the big established players, all deal in fiat. They're not eager to jump into crypto. Similar with end users, we've all seen the memes. 90+% of consumers out there don't know crypto, don't understand crypto, will not touch crypto with a 10-foot pole, right? So forcing them to use a digital currency to transact on this, forcing them to use it, we think is a wrong move. If we want adoption, we've got to talk to them in terms that they can manage and that they will be comfortable using. So settlement for energy consumption is in fiat. What we do is we do charge our transaction fee in our own token. That's the fuel, as it were, on the blockchain itself. And that's what our token is used for, settlement for transaction fees.
Yep. Okay. I think that's clear. And I do agree with your point on if we want blockchain to reach a mass adoption, I mean, we need to make it simple to use. Most people won't put in the effort. I mean, when we're talking about the mass market, to put in the effort to really understand cryptocurrency and all the intricacies behind it. So user experience is critical, right?
Yep. Absolutely critical, especially energy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're also on the right path with with the models that you show about having a one platform to really it's simple to see which energy you're consuming and so on and so forth.
Yep.
Great. I think we have time for a few more questions. I have one of my main questions, Martin, for you is it's a little bit more on the longer term. So what is like if we were to have a time machine, and we go 10 years into the future, where is Electrify? What's happening with Electrify, and where do you see Electrify in 10 years, basically?
Wow. I
Yeah.
hope that's a big thing. I hope
Yeah.
Electrify is going to be the normal way in which energy will be traded, at least in Asia,
Yeah.
at least in Southeast Asia, at the very least. Southeast Asia, including Japan and so on. China has its own intricacies, very, very huge market, very, very complicated market. So I'm not sure if even in 10 years we'll be able to take a
Yeah.
crack at China. Um, if we can get into other geographies and can deploy into places like India, for example, where there's a lot of solar deployment right now, or even in Europe, where there's a lot of renewables being consumed and transacted, if we can play a significant part in those markets, it'd be a huge, huge bonus. But even just Southeast Asia alone, I mean, the market here is insanely huge and growing. Southeast Asia represents a
Yeah.
huge growing population and huge demand over the next 10 to 20 years in terms of energy. And
Yeah.
I think that's going to be very, very significant. If we can make a big dent there and we can become the significant main player, at least in this part of the world, that's going to be a very big thing. We
Yeah.
we don't have the conceit, I think, to imagine that will become the dominant player around the world. I think with the rate at which technology is being deployed, that someone else will develop similar technology in other parts of the world to address their markets is a very strong reality. But again, as you said, it's not a zero-sum game. The world is a huge place to play in, and energy consumption is only going up.
Yeah. No, and for example, I mean, Bloomberg New Energy Finance has projected that more than 50% of new renewable energy investment will be in the Asia Pacific region. I mean,
That's
energy
right.
demand is growing. The economies are one of the fastest growing in the world.
Mhm.
And electricity markets are deregulating, so it's definitely the place to be, so to say. Um, so okay, I think we can round out the webinar. Thanks, Martin, for your time. It's been really enlightening to hear your presentation and Electrify's view on deregulated markets and blockchain. So I would like to thank you. And for all other attendees, well, I hope to see you at the Blockchain2Energy Asia in Singapore. Martin will be there as a speaker, and we'll have the leading blockchain energy projects there, so that you can learn from the best. And we're also part of Asia Blockchain Week, so all blockchain enthusiasts will be there in Singapore for a whole week. So thanks a lot, Martin, again. I hope to see you all soon, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leoncio. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.